Have you ever wondered what you would do if everything you loved, your home, your dignity, even your child, was stripped away in front of strangers? Clara Bennett stood on an auction block in a dusty frontier town, clutching her infant son, Samuel, while men bargained for their lives as if they were cattle. A widow with no protector, no coin, and nowhere to turn her future was being decided by the highest bidder. And then, at the last moment, a cowboy rode in from the edge of the horizon. Daniel McGraw, a man carrying his own scars from war, forced to choose whether to look away like the rest or stake his future on a woman and child he'd never met. If it were you facing that kind of choice, would you risk everything for strangers? Or would fear keep you silent? This is not just a tale of hardship, but of courage, second chances, and the kind of love that only the frontier could forge. Stay with us as we step into Clara and Daniel's story, and ask yourself, what would you have done? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss another journey into the heart of the frontier. The sun hung low over the Dakota Territory, throwing long shadows across the main street of Silverton. Folks gathered in uneasy silence, their faces tight as they prepared to witness an auction that would stain the town's conscience. On a rough wooden platform stood Clara Bennett, her 6-month-old son Samuel pressed close against her chest. Her bonnet slipped back, revealing strands of chestnut hair and eyes that carried both defiance and fear. The auctioneer cleared his throat, ready to sell a widow and child as if they were livestock, all to settle the late Jonathan Bennett's unpaid debts. The air was heavy with shame. Some townsmen shifted uncomfortably, while others studied Clara as though weighing what use she might serve. Baby Samuel cooed softly, unaware of the peril, his small hand tugging at his mother's worn calico sleeve. "Ladies and gents," called out Silas Grant, the banker who had arranged this travesty. "As executor of Jonathan Bennett's estate, it falls to me to resolve what he left behind. Before you is his widow and her boy, a fine young woman, capable and strong. Bidding begins at $50. His tone was oily, laced with suggestion, and Clara's stomach knotted. Far out on the trail, a lone rider urged his buckskin stallion forward. Daniel McGraw had been pushing hard for 3 days after a passing traveler told him of the disgraceful auction in Silverton. Daniel wasn't a man easily stirred, yet something in him had insisted he ride through the night. He had drifted across the frontier for a decade, a quiet man marked by the war, never staying anywhere long. By the time he reached the crowd, the bidding had climbed to $75. Clara clutched Samuel tighter when a burly miner raised his hand for $85. That was when Daniel's steady voice rang out from the back. $100. The crowd turned as Daniel swung down from his dust-covered horse. He was lean and weathered, streaks of silver showing at his temples, his blue eyes unwavering beneath the brim of his battered Stetson. With each step toward the platform, the tension deepened. Silas Grant protested weakly. "We already have 85, stranger." "Who are you to Daniel McGraw?" he replied evenly, tossing a pouch of gold onto the table. "That's 100. More than enough to clear Bennett's debt." When Silas sputtered, Daniel dropped in more coins without hesitation. $120, if that's what it takes. For the first time that day, Clara met his gaze. What she saw there, compassion, steadiness, and something long buried, broke through her terror. "Going once," the banker muttered reluctantly. "Going twice. Sold." The murmur of the crowd faded as Daniel climbed the steps. Up close, Clara seemed younger than he had expected. Not yet 25. Her eyes brimming with tears she refused to shed. Daniel tipped his hat. "Ma'am," he said gently, "come with me. Why, she whispered, searching his face. Why would you do this? Not here, he answered quietly. I've got a room at the boarding house. We'll talk there. She stiffened. How do I know your intentions are any better than theirs? You don't, Daniel admitted with a ghost of a smile. But I give you my word, no harm will come to you or your boy while you're under my care. I knew your husband once. Clara froze at that. After a moment's pause, she gave the slightest nod and allowed him to help her down. Together, they walked through the parting crowd, toward Mrs. Whitfield's boarding house. Inside, rooms were scarce, but Daniel insisted Clara take his. He would make do with a cot in the storage room as she stepped into the small chamber bed, washstand, and little else. Daniel remained at the open door, respectful of the distance between them. You said you knew Jonathan, she said at last, settling Samuel on her lap. Daniel removed his hat. We rode together during the war, lost touch after. He was a brave man. Clara's eyes clouded with grief. He was a good husband, too, until the drinking and cards took him from us. I didn't realize how deep his debts were until he passed 3 months ago. Daniel nodded. I believe he loved you. I believe he loved that boy. Her voice sharpened. So what happens now? Mr. McGraw, have I traded one master for another? No, ma'am. I've got a small place 2 days from here. Nothing fancy, but it's quiet. You can stay until you decide your next step. I expect nothing in return. Call it a debt paid to an old comrade. Skepticism lingered in her eyes, but exhaustion won. She finally whispered, Thank you, later that night, as Daniel lay awake on a hard cot in the storage room. He wondered what madness had driven him to step into Clara Bennett's life. For years he had avoided roots or ties, yet the sight of her standing tall in humiliation had stirred something long buried in him. And Samuel Daniel had always had a soft spot for children, though he had never thought he'd have one of his own. At dawn, Clara rose with the baby, restless from a night of broken sleep. When Daniel appeared at her door with a bundle of biscuits, jerky, and a tin of milk for the child, she studied him warily. Thank you, she said at last, her voice soft. And call me Clara. It feels wrong to keep distance from the man who bought our freedom. Daniel flinched at the words. I didn't buy you. Clara, I settled a debt that never should have been placed on your shoulders. That's all. Clara gave a faint smile, though her voice carried a trace of weariness. You say there is a difference, Mr. McGraw, but I do not see it. One way or another, I feel indebted to you now. Daniel shook his head. You owe me nothing. The only obligation you have is to yourself and that boy. He nodded toward Samuel, who stirred softly in her arms. He's a handsome child. How old is he? 6 months. Next week, she replied, hesitating a little before asking, Would you like to hold him? Daniel looked caught off guard, his expression a mix of uncertainty and alarm. I am not accustomed to babies. I would not know how. It's not difficult, Clara assured him gently. Just keep one hand behind his head and the other under him. She rose and placed Samuel carefully into Daniel's arms, guiding his hands until the baby was secure. At first, Daniel stood stiff as a fence post, afraid to move, afraid even to breathe. Samuel blinked up at him with wide, curious blue eyes. Slowly, Daniel's shoulders eased, and the hard lines of his face softened into something almost tender. Well now, he murmured, studying the little boy. Hello there, young man. Clara watched the moment closely. There was a kindness about Daniel that lay hidden beneath the weathered skin and worn coat. Samuel seemed to sense it, too, for he made no protest, only nestled quietly in the cowboy's arms. Reluctantly, Daniel handed the child back. "We ought to be on our way. The ride to my place is long, and I'd rather travel before the worst of the sun sets in." Clara nodded. "I've nothing left to gather, only what I carried when they took our home." A flicker of anger crossed Daniel's eyes at that, but he quickly reined it in. "Mrs. Whitfield found a few supplies for the boy, and I arranged for a wagon instead of horses. Thought it might be easier on you and the baby." The gesture moved her more than she expected. "Thank you, Mr. McGraw." Within the hour they were leaving Silverton behind. Daniel held the reins steady while Clara sat beside him. Samuel swaddled against her chest. Her worldly possessions fit easily into a small trunk: 2 dresses, a shawl, Samuel's blanket, and a locket with a lock of Jonathan's hair. Daniel had added provisions from the store flour, beans, diapers for the baby, and a few other necessities. As the town slipped from view, Clara felt an odd mix of fear and relief. Silverton had been the place where she knew both happiness and crushing sorrow. Now she was heading into the unknown, beside a man she barely knew, yet somehow trusted. There was something steady about Daniel McGraw, something that made her feel safer than she had in months. "Tell me about your homestead," she asked after a time. He kept his eyes on the trail. "It isn't much. 100 acres near the Bitterroot Range. 1 cabin, a barn, a corral, about 30 head of cattle and a handful of horses I'm breaking for sale, and you live there alone." He nodded. "Had a hired man last season, but he left for California. Since then, it's just me." A faint smile touched his lips. "Quiet life, sometimes too quiet." They rode on in silence, the wagon wheels crunching over the rugged Dakota earth. The July sun bore down, though a light breeze kept the heat from becoming unbearable. Samuel soon drifted asleep, lulled by the gentle rocking of the wagon. Clara hesitated before asking, "Why were you in Silverton at all? You said you heard of the auction. From whom, and why did it matter to you?" Daniel was quiet so long she thought he might not answer. At last he said, "I was in Fort Bridger delivering horses. Met a man on the trail who just passed through Silverton. He mentioned the auction, said it wasn't right. Selling a woman and her child. He gave your name, Bennett." He tightened his grip on the reins. "Your husband saved my life once. Shiloh, 1862. Took a bullet that was meant for me. If his widow was in need, I could not turn my back." Clara absorbed his words in silence, her throat tightening. "That's very honorable of you." Daniel shrugged. "Just doing what needed doing." At midday they stopped to rest the horses. They shared a modest meal of dried apples, jerky, and biscuits, while Clara fed and changed Samuel in the shade behind the wagon. When she returned, Daniel was filling a canteen from a narrow stream. "Water's good here," he said, handing it to her. "We'll make camp a few hours ahead, near Aspen Creek. There's a spot I know, sheltered and safe." Gratitude warmed her. She had rarely traveled outside town and found the wide country both beautiful and overwhelming. Daniel's calm assurance gave her courage. Through the afternoon, she watched him when he was not aware. There was a sadness in him, a solitude that seemed to have settled deep into his bones. The war, the years of drifting, something had left its mark, etching lines into his face and a weariness into his gaze. By late day, dark clouds massed on the horizon. A chill wind swept the plains, Daniel glanced skyward. Storm's coming. We may not reach Aspen Creek before it hits. A low rumble of thunder rolled across the land. Samuel whimpered at the sound. Daniel flicked the reins gently. There's an old line shack up ahead, about a mile. Not much, but solid. We'll ride it out there. The first drops began to fall, fat and cold, quickly turning into sheets of rain. Lightning split the sky as the small wooden shack came into view. Daniel urged the team into a trot, pulling up just as the heavens opened. Stay here, he ordered, leaping down. He checked the shack before returning. Empty, dusty, but dry. He lifted Clara down and carried in their meager supplies. She hurried inside with Samuel. The shack held a rough-hewn table, 2 chairs, a cot, and a small stone fireplace. Dust covered the corners, but the walls were solid against the wind. Daniel returned, soaked to the skin, with an armload of firewood. Found some out back. Should burn. Clara spread a blanket on the floor for Samuel, who gurgled happily despite the storm. Let me help you with the fire, she offered. You're dripping. Together they coaxed a flame to life, the fire soon casting a warm glow in the one-room shelter. Outside, rain hammered the roof and thunder cracked the sky. Daniel stripped off his sodden coat and hung it to dry near the hearth, then pulled off his boots with a weary sigh. Clara busied herself preparing a small meal of beans and jerky, adding the last of Mrs. Whitfield's biscuits. She set a plate before him with a hint of apology. It isn't much. He gave her a faint smile. Better than most suppers I've cooked for myself. They ate in silence, the fire snapping, the rain drumming, Samuel cooing softly on the blanket. Clara felt something she had not known in months, a fragile peace. For the first time since Jonathan's death, she allowed herself to breathe, comforted by the storm's fury kept at bay and by the quiet presence of Daniel McGraw across the table. After supper, Daniel insisted Clara take the cot with Samuel. He spread his own bedroll on the plank floor near the fire. Clara tucked the baby into his blanket, then turned her head toward Daniel as he knelt to smooth out his blanket. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice carrying more meaning than the simple words could hold. "For everything." Daniel lifted his eyes to her, the firelight reflecting in their blue depths. "No thanks needed." "Yes, there is," she replied gently. "You could have ridden on and left me to my fate. Most men would have." His expression grew still, unreadable. "Get some rest. Clara, tomorrow's another long stretch of trail." She lay down beside Samuel, who was already sound asleep, his tiny fist resting against her arm. Outside, the storm rumbled on, but within the shelter there was a strange peace. Daniel's breathing soon deepened, steady and calm. Clara lay awake, watching the shadows play across the low ceiling, her heart whispering a cautious hope. For the first time since Jonathan's death, she dared imagine a future not built solely on survival. Whatever waited at Daniel McGraw's homestead, she felt the faint stirrings of the possibility that she and Samuel might not only endure, but begin again. At last, lulled by the storm and the quiet company of the cowboy who had, for reasons she still did not fully grasp, chosen to save them. Clara drifted into slumber. By morning, the storm had blown itself out. Sunlight streamed across the plains, turning the world fresh and glistening. Clara awoke to find Daniel already outside, checking the team. Samuel slept peacefully, his cherub face softened in dreams. She quickly washed with the basin Daniel had left for her, then slipped into her second dress, a faded blue calico. Though worn, it was clean. By the time Daniel stepped back inside, she had stirred up the fire and warmed the last of the coffee. "Good morning," she said, offering him a faint smile. "The coffee will be ready in a moment." Daniel removed his hat and nodded. "Ground's muddy from the rain, but passable. If we keep pace, we'll reach my place by sundown." They ate a simple breakfast of hardtack and dried fruit. As Clara packed their few belongings, Daniel surprised her by scooping Samuel into his arms. "Well, young man," he said softly, "ready for another day on the trail?" Samuel gurgled in delight, reaching for Daniel's rough chin. Daniel chuckled, the sound warm, his face momentarily transformed. Clara's heart ached at the sight. Jonathan had never been at ease with the child, often leaving the room when Samuel cried. Watching Daniel's unstudied tenderness filled her with both gratitude and a faint sorrow for what might have been. They set out beneath a wide, blue sky. The wagon wheels occasionally stuck in muddy patches, but moved steadily on. By midday, the flat plains yielded to gentle hills dotted with stands of pine and aspen. In the distance, peaks rose against the horizon, still capped with snow, though summer pressed down on the land. "That's the Bitterroot Range," Daniel said, catching her gaze. "My place sits just where those trees start climbing." Clara studied the mountains, struck by their majesty. "It's beautiful, wilder than anything I've ever known." "It grows on you," Daniel said, his voice low. "The quiet, the space, though I reckon it can feel too quiet after town life." She thought of Silverton of the Whispers, the stairs, the pity that had shadowed her since Jonathan's death, and the debts revealed after what I've endured. "Quiet sounds like heaven," she admitted. They paused at a stream to water the horses. Clara sat beneath a tree to nurse Samuel, while Daniel filled the canteens. How much farther, she asked when he returned. 3, maybe 4 hours if the trail stays kind. "We'll stop again before then. Let the team rest proper." Clara burped Samuel gently. "He's been such a good baby through all this." Daniel studied the child. Strong boy, like his mother. The word startled her. For months she had heard only reproach or pity. To be called strong touched something deep. "I'm not sure about that," she said softly. "If I'd been stronger, maybe I wouldn't have ended up on that platform." Daniel's face hardened. "That wasn't your doing. Silas Grant and men like him prey on the vulnerable. You did the best you could." She lowered her gaze. "I should have found another way." "What way?" he countered. "They stripped you of your home, your belongings, left you with a child to feed and no kin nearby. Don't carry blame that isn't yours." His voice was gruff, but the kindness beneath it eased a knot inside her. As the afternoon waned, the land grew more rugged. The trail wound through taller pines, sunlight slanting gold across the ground. Samuel slept again, his small hand tangled in Clara's hair. "There it is," Daniel said at last, as they topped a small rise. "Home." Below lay a clearing, cradled by forest. A modest log cabin stood with its stone chimney smoking faintly, a barn and corral nearby where several horses grazed. A narrow creek cut across the property, its banks shaded by willows. Clara drew a sharp breath. "It's lovely." Daniel's mouth curved in a faint smile. "It isn't much, but it's peaceful." They descended toward the cabin. As they drew closer, Clara noticed a small vegetable garden tilled neatly beside the house, a pile of chopped wood stacked against the barn, and a rocking chair resting on the porch. Evidence of a life carved with care and quiet discipline. Daniel halted the wagon and helped Clara down before unhitching the team. She stood still for a moment, drinking in the serenity of the place. The only sounds were the soft nickers of horses, the murmur of the creek, and the whisper of the pines. "Come on," Daniel said at last. He carried in their few belongings and opened the cabin door. Inside, the single large room was plain but sturdy. A stone hearth dominated one wall, with a wooden table and 4 chairs set neatly near it. Shelves lined with jars, books, and tools occupied the corners. Beside the fireplace sat a rocking chair, worn smooth by use. It was simple, but to Clara's eyes, it was the most welcoming sight she had seen in months. A narrow doorway opened into what was clearly a bedroom, while a ladder against the wall hinted at a loft tucked above. Daniel glanced at her, a rare flicker of uncertainty crossing his features. "It isn't fancy," he said, almost apologetic. "But it's solid, keeps the winter winds where they belong. It's wonderful," Clara answered with conviction. After months of fear and humiliation, the simple cabin seemed like a sanctuary carved out just for her and her son. Daniel carried her small bag into the room. "You and Samuel can take this space. I'll sleep in the loft." Clara hesitated. "This is your home." "I couldn't," but the determined set of his jaw silenced her. Instead, she offered a soft, "Thank you." The room was plain but comforting. A sturdy bed covered with a hand-stitched quilt filled one corner. A small chest of drawers sat against the wall, and a single window looked out over the creek. She set Samuel on the bed, tucking pillows around him for safety, and took a long breath to steady herself. Daniel's voice came from the doorway. "I'll start supper. Nothing grand, but it'll be hot." Then he disappeared toward the kitchen, left alone. Clara splashed water from the basin on her face, wiping away the weariness of the road. When she dared look in the small mirror above the chest, she saw a woman both changed and familiar. The same features stared back, but her eyes carried a weight she had not known a year ago. When she returned, Daniel was stirring a pot at the stove. The smell of venison mingled with herbs from his garden. He had removed his coat, sleeves rolled up, his broad arms flexing with each movement. For the first time, she saw him not as the quiet rescuer from the road, but as a man at ease in his own space. "Can I help?" she asked. He nodded toward a small bin. "There's bread in there. Slice some, if you don't mind." They worked side by side in companionable silence until the table was set. Clara checked on Samuel, who still slept soundly, before sitting across from Daniel. "He's worn out from the journey," she explained. "I ought to wake him, but he looks so peaceful." "Let him rest," Daniel said easily. "Babies let you know when they're hungry." The stew was hearty, rich with vegetables and tender meat. Clara realized she was far hungrier than she'd thought, and accepted a second helping. "This is delicious," she said with genuine admiration. "You're quite the cook." A faint flush touched his cheeks. A man living alone either learns to cook or goes hungry. I prefer the first. She smiled. "How long have you been here?" "6 years. Bought this land after drifting from ranch to ranch once the war ended. The cabin was near falling down then. Spent the better part of a year patching it together." She looked around at the sturdy beams and neatly kept shelves. "You've done a fine job. It feels like a real home." Something flickered in his eyes, a quiet pride, perhaps even a longing for recognition he rarely sought. "It suits me," he said simply. As the evening wore on, Clara found herself sharing more than she'd intended. She spoke of her childhood in Philadelphia, daughter of a school teacher, dreaming once of being a teacher herself. She spoke of Jonathan, the handsome Irishman who had swept her away with promises of gold and prosperity. "He was so sure he'd strike it rich," she said wistfully. We were going to have a fine house in town, and a family full of children. Out here, though, dreams fade fast. Daniel's gaze was steady, his voice low. The frontier strips life down to the bone. Some folks find that too much to bear. Others find a kind of freedom in it. And you, she asked. He considered. Both, at different times, but mostly freedom now. A cry from the bedroom broke their talk. Clara excused herself, returning with Samuel in her arms. Daniel had cleared the table and was stoking the fire. "There's milk cooling on the sill," he said. "Cows are in the barn. You're welcome to it, as long as you're here." Clara settled in the rocking chair, cradling her child. Gratitude filled her. This is more than I ever expected. On that platform in Silverton, I thought Samuel and I were lost. Her throat tightened at the memory. "No one should face that," Daniel said, voice roughened by anger. "Silas Grant has ruined more families than I care to count." For a while they sat in silence, broken only by the baby's soft sounds and the pop of the fire. An ease had grown between them, surprising in its swiftness. Later, Clara laid Samuel down to sleep and stepped outside. Daniel leaned against the porch rail, cigarette glowing faintly in the night. He glanced at her, then offered the chair. "It's so peaceful," she murmured, gazing at the stars. "After the war, I couldn't stand towns. Too loud, too crowded. Out here a man can breathe." And a woman, she asked softly. His eyes met hers in the dim light. "Depends on the woman." Clara rocked gently. "Considering, I won't be a burden to you. Daniel, I can cook, sew, keep house, and when Samuel is older, I'll find work of my own. There's no rush. You're welcome here as long as you need. I meant it when I said I owed Jonathan." She studied him. Was that debt so great? Daniel stared into the darkness. "He saved my life at Shiloh. After, when I was laid up, he wrote my family to tell them I was alive. They'd been told otherwise. Gave them hope again. A man doesn't forget that." Her heart softened at the depth of his loyalty. "Still," she pressed, "I need to contribute. It matters to me." Daniel nodded. "We'll work it out." He crushed the cigarette beneath his boot. "Best get some sleep. You've had a long road." Clara rose, suddenly aware of her weariness. "Good night, Daniel. And thank you. Good night, Clara." As she slipped back into the cabin and lay beside her son, the safety of this place wrapped around her like the quilt on the bed. She had known Daniel McGraw for scarcely more than 2 days, yet she trusted him in a way she could not explain. Perhaps it was his quiet kindness after so much scorn and cruelty in Silverton. Whatever the reason, for the first time in months, Clara closed her eyes with hope in her heart. The following days soon found a rhythm. Clara, long accustomed to managing a household, took naturally to cooking and keeping the cabin tidy. Daniel worked the cattle, trained horses, and tended fences, but always stopped to check on her and the boy. Samuel thrived. The mountain air strengthened him, and he grew lively, tugging at anything within reach. Daniel built a small wooden pen so Clara could work with both hands free, while Samuel played safely nearby. One morning, about 2 weeks after their arrival, Clara was hanging laundry on a line stretched between 2 tall pines. She caught Daniel watching her from the corral, though he quickly turned back to the young mare he was training. She smiled quietly to herself, warmed by his shy restraint. Their evenings by the fire had revealed more of his past. Youngest of 4 brothers, raised on a farm in Ohio, he had fought through much of the war before drifting steadily westward. The scar along his arm was only the surface of what he carried. Yet what struck Clara most was his tenderness with Samuel. Each evening he held the child while she prepared supper, speaking to him in a soothing rumble about the work of the day. Samuel reached for him whenever he entered the room, a habit that seemed to please and puzzle Daniel in equal measure. As July faded into August, the days grew hotter. Daniel began giving Clara lessons on horseback, using his gentlest mare, a dappled gray called Willow. Clara had never felt steady on a horse, but under Daniel's patient teaching, her confidence grew. "You're a natural," he told her one evening as they rode slowly along the creek. "Just ease those shoulders." She adjusted, smiling as Samuel, snug in the sling across her chest, looked out wide-eyed at the land that might just become their home. "It is not nearly as frightening as I imagined," Clara confessed as the mare carried her along the creek path, "though I doubt I will ever ride as you do." Daniel chuckled. "The sound warm and easy. Been on horseback since before I could read. You are doing just fine for a city lady." The words were teasing, not unkind, and Clara smiled back at him. This city lady appreciates the lesson. They rode in comfortable quiet, the evening sun laying gold across the fields and turning Aspen Creek into a ribbon of light. A doe stepped from the trees, her fawn close behind, both pausing to drink from the shallows. Clara's breath caught. It feels like living inside a painting. I never believed such beauty existed in this world. Daniel turned in his saddle to look at her, something softer than amusement in his eyes. I never thought so either. For a moment the world seemed to hold still, as if even the breeze waited on their silence. Then Samuel, strapped against his mother, grabbed a fistful of Willow's mane. The mare tossed her head, and Daniel reached across to gently free the baby's grip. "Steady there, young fellow," he murmured. Clara laughed. "He is becoming quite the explorer. Yesterday I caught him trying to climb over the side of his cradle." Daniel grinned with approval. "A boy with spirit. He will make a fine horseman one day." The words lingered between them, carrying more meaning than either dared speak. They both knew her stay at the McGraw homestead could not last forever, yet neither seemed willing to discuss its end. As they turned back toward the cabin, Daniel cleared his throat. "There is a celebration in Maple Ridge next Saturday, Founder's Day. Thought you might like to go meet folks, have a change of scene." Clara blinked at the unexpected offer. "I would like that. But are you sure Samuel does not always enjoy crowds?" "Neighbors out here are used to babies," Daniel replied. "Besides, it might do you good to talk with someone other than an old ranch hand." "You are hardly old," Clara countered, smiling, "and I value your company." His cheeks colored faintly. "Still, I thought a day in town might please you. There will be food, music, dancing." "It sounds wonderful," she admitted. Then she frowned, glancing down at her worn dress. "But I have nothing fit for such an occasion. Only this and one other, both too plain." Daniel considered. "Mrs. Agnes Harper keeps a well-stocked store. We can ride into Maple Ridge tomorrow, see if something suits." Touched by his thoughtfulness, Clara nodded. "I would be grateful." The next morning, they set out early. Maple Ridge, though small, had a tidy, thriving feel so unlike the harsh and desperate Silverton she had left behind. The general store stood near the center of town, its shelves brimming with goods. Mrs. Harper greeted Daniel with a broad smile. "Well, Daniel McGraw. I swear it has been months since you darkened my doorway." Her keen gaze fell upon Clara and the baby, and who might these fine guests be? "This is Mrs. Clara Bennett and her son, Samuel," Daniel said. "They are staying with me for a spell." "Mrs." Harper's eyes twinkled. "Welcome, dear. And such a handsome little boy." She reached for Samuel, who promptly stretched his fingers toward her spectacles. "Careful." Clara laughed. "He has sticky hands these days." "I raised 5 myself." "Mrs." Harper said with ease, bouncing the baby expertly. "I know all about curious little ones. Now, what can I do for you?" Daniel explained they were seeking a dress for the Founders' Day celebration. "Mrs." Harper's face lit up. "You are in luck. A shipment from back east came in just last week. Most women here sew their own. So these are still waiting for the right owner." She led Clara to a rack of garments. Among them hung a soft blue calico trimmed in white. Clara brushed the fabric with her fingertips, her breath catching. "It is beautiful." "Try it, Mrs." Harper urged, motioning to the curtained corner. "I will keep Samuel entertained." Clara stepped into the alcove. When she emerged, the dress fitting as though it had been made for her. Both Mrs. Harper and Daniel stared. "My goodness, Mrs." Harper said warmly. "It suits you perfectly." Daniel said nothing at first, but the admiration in his eyes was more eloquent than words. Clara felt her cheeks grow warm. "We will take it," Daniel said firmly, "and a ribbon to match. If you have one." Clara shook her head quickly. "Daniel, that is too costly." "Think of it as a gift," he replied, his voice leaving no room for argument. "You have more than earned it, with all you have done at the homestead. Mrs." Harper's knowing smile flickered between them as she wrapped the dress. Her favorite pastime was clear learning what she could of every newcomer. "So, Mrs. Bennett, are you from around here?" Clara hesitated, then answered simply, "No. My husband passed a fever. Samuel and I came west hoping for a new start. She left the darker truth unspoken, and Daniel offered no correction. Well, you are welcome here in Maple Ridge, Mrs." Harper declared warmly. "We pride ourselves on being friendlier than those rough mining camps, and this rancher of ours is one of our most respected neighbors, though we see him too seldom." Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "Just busy with work." "Too busy," she scolded gently. "A man needs more than cattle and horses for company." Her glance slid between Daniel and Clara, carrying meaning neither dared acknowledge aloud. "On the ride back." Clara found her mind returning to that glance. Had there been others, Mrs. Harper had hoped to match with Daniel. The thought stirred an unfamiliar jealousy she quickly tried to set aside. Daniel had shown nothing but kindness and honor. Whatever his past, it belonged to him alone. "Mrs. Harper seems fond of you," Clara said lightly. "She is good people." Daniel agreed. "Her husband, Thomas, was the first mayor here before he passed. They looked after me when I was new in these parts. Thomas taught me the work of ranching in the Bitterroot Range, and Agnes made certain I had food through that first hard winter." Clara was touched by this glimpse into his early struggles. "You have built a fine life here." Daniel gave a small nod. "I try to. Some days it feels enough. Others—" He let the thought trail away. Samuel stirred against her chest then, letting out a plaintive cry of hunger. Clara shifted him gently, her heart swelling with gratitude for the strange, unexpected path that had brought them to this place, a path that now seemed to lead not into darkness, but perhaps toward light. Daniel guided the wagon beneath a tall cottonwood, where the broad leaves cast a welcome shade. "We can pause here," he suggested quietly. "Give you a chance to tend to him without every eye in the county upon you." Clara's heart stirred at his thoughtfulness. Jonathan, for all his restless charm, had never been so mindful of her needs or their child's. As she settled against the tree trunk, nursing Samuel in the hush of the afternoon, her mind kept returning to the difference between the two men. It was unfair to compare. She knew. Jonathan had been young, reckless with dreams of striking it rich, a man chasing promises whispered on the wind. He had loved her in his own fashion, and she did not doubt he would have loved their boy had he lived to see him grow. But Daniel's steadiness, his quiet strength, his reliable support showed her a different kind of devotion, one born not of bright schemes, but of loyalty and constancy. The thought unsettled her. She was still a widow, scarcely a year gone, and it felt dangerous to let her heart stir again. Yet the warmth she felt when Daniel smiled, the ease of moving about his cabin as if she belonged there, these things were harder to deny each passing day. She told herself she must be cautious. Daniel had offered sanctuary, not courtship. Best to remember that. When Founder's Day arrived in Maple Ridge, it was all Daniel had promised and more. The town square gleamed with lanterns and bunting. Long tables sagged with food, while a wooden platform held fiddlers sawing out lively reels. Families from miles around had gathered, laughter and music spilling into the twilight air. Clara felt her breath tighten as they entered the square. Samuel held close against her. It had been so long since she'd walked into a crowd, not since before Jonathan's passing, and never as a stranger among strangers. But Daniel's solid presence beside her steadied her nerves, as did the familiar weight of her child. "Daniel McGraw!" A booming voice rang out. A tall man with a broad mustache strode toward them, hand outstretched. "I was beginning to think you'd forgotten your neighbors. Wouldn't miss it." "Sheriff," Daniel replied, shaking the man's hand. "Clara, this is Sheriff Amos Carter," Daniel added. "Sheriff, Mrs. Clara Bennett and her boy, Samuel." The sheriff tipped his hat. "Ma'am, fine-looking lad you have there." "Thank you, Sheriff," Clara answered, relieved by his easy manners. "Daniel bringing you around means you must be special," the lawman teased. "This fellow rarely leaves his cattle unless prodded at gunpoint." Daniel's ears reddened. "Don't pay him any mind. Clara, Amos has a habit of stretching the truth." "Do I?" Now the sheriff laughed. "When was the last social you attended?" "Daniel, Christmas of '76, was it? Too busy living with cows and fence posts." He winked, then excused himself to settle a squabble at the refreshment table. Daniel leaned close. "Forgive him. Amos means well, but he has never learned the art of discretion." "I like him," Clara said softly. "It's plain he cares for you." "That's the way of things out here," Daniel told her. "People look out for each other. It's survival." Together they threaded through the crowd, Daniel introducing her to neighbor after neighbor. Smiles greeted her, though she caught more than one curious glance. A few raised brows. A solitary rancher suddenly appearing with a woman and child was bound to stir tongues. Mrs. Agnes Harper soon appeared, sweeping Samuel into her arms while insisting Clara and Daniel join the dancing. Clara hesitated, but Daniel surprised her by offering his hand. "May as well give them something real to gossip over," he said with a rare grin. Clara placed her hand in his, her pulse quickening at the contact. "I'd be honored. Though I warn you, I'm out of practice." "Then we'll stumble together," he replied. Leading her into a Virginia reel, they moved with surprising ease, laughing as the fiddlers drove the steps faster and faster. Daniel, despite his long frame, was graceful, guiding her with sure hands. When the music ended, both were breathless. standing close enough that Clara could feel the heat of his palm at her waist. "Not bad for a pair of hermits," she teased. His eyes softened, something unspoken flickering there. "Not bad at all." Before the moment could deepen, a bright voice cut in. Daniel McGraw, dancing. The world must surely be ending. They turned to see a young woman, fair-haired and blue-eyed, smiling with easy familiarity. "Eleanor Price," Daniel acknowledged, his tone even. "I did not know you were back." "Returned last month. My father's health is failing." Her gaze slid to Clara, coolly appraising. "Eleanor Price," she said, extending her hand. "My family runs the sawmill." "Clara Bennett," Clara replied, taking it with a polite smile. "And how do you know our Daniel?" Eleanor asked, with just enough emphasis on R to stiffen Clara's spine. Daniel answered smoothly before Clara could speak. "Clara's husband was a friend of mine during the war. She and her boy are staying at the ranch for a spell." "How generous of you," Eleanor remarked, though her tone suggested she found it less kindness than curiosity. "Always the gentleman, aren't you?" Clara's chest tightened. There was history here, perhaps the kind that involved whispered promises and stolen dances. Eleanor leaned closer, her hand brushing Daniel's arm. "Has he shown you Crystal Falls, yet most beautiful place in the county? He used to take me there for picnics." Clara forced her smile to remain steady. "We've been rather occupied with ranch work." "Well, insist he take you." Eleanor pressed. "It's not to be missed. Save me a dance later." "Daniel." He nodded, without enthusiasm. "If you wish." As Eleanor drifted away, Daniel exhaled slowly. "An old friend?" Clara asked, keeping her tone casual. "Something like that. Long ago." She sensed his reluctance and let the subject drop. Instead, they sought out Samuel, who was happily passed among admiring women while Mrs. Harper beamed. The rest of the day passed in a pleasant whirl, though Clara remained keenly aware of glances and whispers. Daniel, true to his word, danced once with Eleanor, but most of his time was spent at Clara's side, making sure she was welcomed. As night fell, lanterns lit the square, and a bonfire crackled, sending sparks into the dark sky. Samuel, worn out, slept against Clara's shoulder. "Ready to head back?" Daniel asked softly. Clara nodded. "It has been lovely, but Samuel has had his fill." On the ride home, silence wrapped around them, broken only by the creak of wheels and the soft breath of horses. Moonlight silvered the trail, turning the world to a dreamscape. "Did you enjoy yourself?" Daniel asked at last. "Very much," Clara said honestly. Everyone was kind. Even Eleanor. His voice was quiet, tinged with wry humor. Clara hesitated. "She seemed interested in you." Daniel gave a short laugh. "Not in the way you think. We courted briefly. 2 years passed. She wanted a husband tied to town and her father's business. I am not that man." "She is very pretty," Clara admitted softly. "Yes," Daniel agreed. Then, after a pause, "but not for me." The words lingered, rich with meaning. Clara found herself wondering what kind of woman might be for him and whether she could ever be that woman. As the wagon crested the hill, the McGraw homestead came into view, a lantern glowing in the window, welcoming them home. "Thank you," Claire murmured, "for the dress, the dancing, all of it." Daniel's profile was etched in silver as he guided the team down the slope. "No thanks needed. I enjoyed it more than I expected." When they stopped, he helped her down, his hand steady at her waist. For a moment they stood close, Samuel sleeping between them, the quiet night wrapping around like a promise neither dared to speak aloud. Clara Daniel began, his voice low, hesitant, as though he had gathered the courage to say something important. But before he could continue, Samuel stirred in her arms and let out a plaintive cry. The spell broke. Clara drew back, adjusting her hold on the child. "I should get him settled for the night," she said softly, though her voice betrayed the unsteady beat of her heart. Daniel's eyes followed her as she slipped into the cabin. "Good night," he answered, the words heavy with what had gone unsaid. Inside. Clara laid Samuel gently into his cradle, smoothing the quilt over his small form. She could hear the familiar sounds of Daniel outside, tending to the horses, the brush of hooves on dirt, the quiet creak of harness leather. Those everyday noises had become oddly comforting, anchoring her in this life that was beginning to feel less borrowed and more her own. Her feelings for him had grown stronger with each passing day, ripening into something far more complicated than gratitude. Yet she reminded herself of her situation. She was still a widow, still dependent on his generosity, her future uncertain as the prairie winds. She dared not confuse kindness with courtship, not when the fragile shelter he had given her and Samuel might be risked by one false step. Still, as she readied herself for bed, she remembered the way he had looked at her during their dance, the warmth of his hand at her waist beneath the lantern light. For the first time since Jonathan's death, she let herself imagine more than survival. She pictured not just safety for herself and Samuel, but happiness, even love. September brought cooler winds that whispered of the winter to come. Life at the McGraw homestead shifted to meet the season's demands. Daniel spent long days mending fences, stacking cords of firewood, and reinforcing the barn against snowstorms. Clara filled the root cellar with jars of vegetables and fruit, her hands busy with canning while Samuel played nearby. The boy was thriving, pulling himself upright on chairs and babbling his first half-words. A tiny tooth had broken through at last, bringing relief after nights of fretful tears. Daniel had carved toys for him from scraps of pine, a small horse, a bear, and a wagon. Samuel dragged proudly across the floor, squealing with delight. Between Clara and Daniel, something had shifted since the Founders' Day celebration. There was a quiet awareness between them, evident in the brush of his hand as he passed her a dish at supper, or in the way her gaze lingered on him as he worked outdoors. And neither gave voice to it, but the possibility hung in the air like the scent of rain before a storm. One crisp morning, as frost sparkled on the grass, Daniel announced he would ride to High Meadow to check a week's stretch of fence before the snow came. "I'll be back before sundown," he said over breakfast, adjusting his hat. Clara nodded, though she couldn't help cautioning. "Be careful. The weather's shifting." He smiled at her concern. "Always am." Then, after a pause, he added, "Thought tomorrow we might ride up to Crystal Falls. It's beautiful this time of year, with the leaves turning." Clara's mind flickered to Eleanor's pointed words at the celebration, the falls he once visited with Eleanor. She caught the hint of unease in his eyes and chose to ease it. "I'd love that," she said gently. "Samuel will enjoy the outing." Relief softened his face. "Good. We'll make a day of it." By evening, the cabin smelled of stew and fresh bread Clara had prepared, ready for his return. But as the light faded and Daniel did not appear, unease crept in. She fed Samuel, rocked him to sleep, and returned to the window again and again, scanning the empty trail. By the time the sky was fully dark, worry pressed hard against her chest. It wasn't like him. What if his horse had thrown him? What if he lay hurt out in the cold, waiting for help that might not come at last. She made her choice. She couldn't simply sit and wait. She bundled Samuel in warm blankets and secured him against her chest. Though her hands trembled, she managed to saddle Willow, the mare Daniel had been teaching her to ride. With a lantern in one hand, she set out toward High Meadow. The night was cold, stars scattered across the sky, the half-moon lending pale light. Clara rode carefully, praying under her breath. "Please be safe," she whispered, unsure if she was speaking to God or to Daniel himself. She had gone perhaps 2 miles when Willow pricked her ears and gave a low nicker. A moment later, another horse answered from the shadows. Clara lifted the lantern, her heart leaping. Clara Daniel's voice called, edged with alarm. His stallion came into view, his own lantern glowing faintly. He looked unharmed, though his expression was a mix of surprise and something warmer. "What in heaven's name are you doing out here?" Relief crashed over her. "You didn't come home," she explained quickly, suddenly feeling foolish. "I was afraid something had happened." Daniel urged his stallion close until they were side by side. In the glow of their lanterns, Clara saw the wonder in his eyes. "You rode out here at night with Samuel because you were worried for me." She lifted her chin. "Yes. Was that wrong?" He shook his head slowly. "Not wrong. Just unexpected." His gaze softened as it drifted to the sleeping child. He reached out, brushing Samuel's small form with a tender hand. "Is he all right?" "He's fine," Clara assured him, sleeping through his first rescue. A rare smile touched Daniel's lips. "I'm sorry I caused you worry. The fence was worse than I thought. Took longer to repair. Then a gelding slipped the corral and I had to round him up. Should have sent word." "Are you hurt?" Clara asked, searching his face in the dim light. "Right as rain. Just tired and hungry," he admitted. His voice gentled. "No one's fretted over me in a long time. Clara feels good." Her throat tightened at the simple truth of it. She had not expected to mean so much to him, and the knowledge stirred something deep inside her. Together, they turned their horses toward the homestead, the lantern swinging, casting circles of light across the dark trail. The night was cold, but Clara felt a warmth she hadn't known in years. "Well, you'd better get used to it," Clara teased lightly, her voice carrying more warmth than jest. "As long as Samuel and I are here at the homestead, you'll always have someone waiting for you to come home." Something flickered in Daniel's eyes at her words, something deep and unguarded. He reached across the narrow space between their horses, his glove brushing hers before wrapping gently around her hand. "Clara," he began, his voice husky, but before he could finish, Samuel stirred in the sling, fussing at the sound of their voices. Daniel gave her hand a brief squeeze, then released it. "Let's get you both back. It's too cold for the little one to be out." They rode the rest of the way in silence, not uncomfortable, but weighted with all that had gone unspoken. Clara felt Daniel's steady presence beside her, and it was as though the night itself had shifted, holding its breath around them. She knew that something between them had turned a corner, even if the words had not yet been spoken. When they reached the homestead, Daniel swung easily from his saddle and was at her side in an instant, lifting Samuel carefully into his arms. "I've got him," he said, carrying the sleeping boy into the cabin, while Clara dismounted and tended to Willow. Inside, she found Daniel stoking the fire, the glow warming his thoughtful expression. "There's stew still on the stove," Clara offered. "You must be hungry." Daniel turned toward her, his face unusually open. "Clara, what you did tonight was reckless, sure, but brave. Riding out into the dark alone with Samuel, just to make sure I was safe. I couldn't just sit and wait, she said simply. Not knowing if you were lying hurt somewhere. Daniel crossed the room slowly, stopping just in front of her. No one's ever done that for me. Not once. His voice was quiet, but the vulnerability in it struck something deep inside her. Then they didn't care enough. Clara answered softly. His hand came up, roughened by years of ranch work, but gentle as it brushed against her cheek. His eyes, usually guarded, held an earnest warmth. I don't think I knew what it felt like to be cared for until you and Samuel came here. Her heart thudded against her ribs. Daniel. He hesitated, then, moving slowly as if to give her every chance to turn away, bent his head and kissed her. The touch was tender, tentative, almost questioning. Clara's eyes stung with sudden tears. When he drew back, his expression was uncertain. I've wanted to do that since Founder's Day, he admitted in a low voice. Maybe even before. Clara lifted her hand to his cheek, feeling the rasp of stubble under her fingertips. I wanted you to, she whispered. Relief lit his features, softening them in a way that made him look younger. He gathered her into his arms, pressing his cheek against her hair. For a long time they stood like that, the fire crackling nearby. Their world narrowed to just the three of them. At last, Daniel murmured, I'm no good with words. Clara, never have been. But what I feel for you, it's real. Not gratitude, not duty, something more. She pulled back just enough to look at him. I feel it too. But Daniel, I'm still a widow. Samuel and I, we're dependent on you. It makes things complicated. To hell with complicated, he said with sudden force. I've lived 10 years keeping my distance from everyone, and it left me with nothing but an empty house. Then you and Samuel showed up, and suddenly this place feels alive again. Feels like a home. He caught her hands in his. I'm not asking for vows, just a chance. A chance for us to see where this leads. The sincerity in his gaze melted the last wall she had been clinging to. Yes, she breathed. Yes, I'd like that very much. Daniel's smile broke wide across his face, and this time when he kissed her, it was with certainty. Clara responded fully, savoring the strength of his embrace, the rightness of it all. When they finally parted, Daniel rested his forehead against hers. I'd best eat that stew before it goes cold. And you ought to rest. It's been a long night. Clara laughed softly, reluctant to let go. Tomorrow's adventure to the falls is still on. Wouldn't miss it, he promised, though with far less drama than the night's ride. The next morning, true to his word, Daniel saddled the horses and packed a simple lunch. The ride to Crystal Falls was brisk, autumn painting the trees in gold and scarlet. When they reached the clearing, Clara caught her breath. The falls tumbled in a white rush over rocky ledges, spilling into a pool ringed with aspens whose leaves shimmered like coins in the sun. The roar of water filled the air, steady and soothing. They spread a blanket on the grassy bank. Samuel was instantly fascinated, crawling across the cloth and reaching for leaves and twigs, squealing with delight. Daniel had brought along a short length of line and stick, fashioning a makeshift fishing rod. He tried to show Samuel how to hold it, but the boy was far more interested in chewing on the stick than in fishing. He'll get it one day. Daniel chuckled, prying the stick from Samuel's mouth for the third time. Clara watched them, her heart swelling. The change in Daniel since their kiss was subtle but undeniable. His manner was lighter, his smiles easier. his care for her and Samuel more openly displayed. He made certain she was comfortable, attentive to every small need without even seeming aware of it. "Penny for your thoughts," Daniel said, catching her gaze as she watched them. Clara smiled, warmth filling her. "I was just thinking, you're a natural with him. You'd make a wonderful father." The words slipped out before she could stop them, and color rose in her cheeks. But Daniel didn't flinch. "I hope to have that chance someday," he said simply, his eyes steady on hers. The moment stretched, laden with meaning. Clara's breath caught. She looked away first, overwhelmed by how quickly her heart was moving in a direction she'd sworn she couldn't risk. It was too soon, too tangled with grief and uncertainty. And yet, sitting there beside the rushing falls, with Daniel at her side and Samuel in her lap, she felt for the first time that they already were something more than what they had dared to name. "Tell me what the winters are like here," Clara asked, her tone light but her eyes curious. "Are they as rough as people say?" Daniel welcomed the shift in subject. "They can be tough. Snow comes heavy, and some nights it drops well below 0. But the cabin is solid, and I've got wood stacked high enough to last. The cattle know how to huddle down when it gets bad. The biggest challenge is the roads. Sometimes you just can't get through." Clara tilted her head. "So you don't go into town as much once the snow comes?" "Not near as often," Daniel replied. "Christmas at the Harpers is about the only social thing I bother with most years." His eyes softened. "But this winter won't be the same. Not with you and Samuel here." Clara nodded slowly. "I've never lived through a Dakota winter. Is it very isolating?" "It can be," he admitted. "But there's beauty in it, too. The quiet, the white hills stretching out for miles, and on a clear night, the stars look close enough to touch." He hesitated before adding, "You worried about being snowed in here with only me for company?" Clara smiled faintly at the vulnerability behind the question. "No. Not at all. I just want to know what to expect. Back in Philadelphia, winter meant crowded streets and coal smoke. In Silverton, it was mud and too many barroom fights." Daniel chuckled. "Well, here you'll have clean air and calm nights. Can't promise Samuel won't get restless." "Though?" Clara glanced at her son, who was currently determined to chase after a butterfly near the edge of the blanket. "He'll be fine. He's got a way of adapting." Before the boy could reach the damp grass, Daniel scooped him up. "Easy there, partner. No swimming lessons today." Samuel squirmed in protest until something shiny caught his eye. Daniel's watch chain. He grabbed it with chubby fingers and studied it as if it held the secrets of the universe. Daniel grinned, but when he looked up, Clara was watching him. There was a softness in her gaze that sent his heart skipping. "What?" he asked. "Just you," she answered quietly. "The way you are with him, the way you look right now." Daniel's expression shifted, tender and honest. "Happy," he said. "Happier than I can remember being." Clara moved closer until their shoulders brushed. Daniel shifted Samuel so the boy sat between them, then slipped his arm carefully around her waist. They stayed like that for a long while, listening to the steady roar of Crystal Falls, watching sunlight scatter across the spray, and feeling Samuel's warm weight nestled between them. Clara thought to herself that this was a moment she'd carry forever, no matter what the future held. Eventually, Samuel's eyes grew heavy, and Clara rocked him gently as he drifted to sleep. "We should ride back before it gets dark," Daniel said reluctantly. They packed up their things, Daniel wrapping the blanket snugly around Samuel before helping Clara onto her horse. The trail back was quiet and peaceful, the autumn colors glowing as the sun dropped low. At the ridge, just before the homestead came into view, Daniel pulled his horse up beside hers. "Thank you for coming with me today. I've always loved this place, but sharing it with you and Samuel, it makes it mean more than I can say." "It's a beautiful spot," Clara replied softly. "Thank you for showing it to us." He hesitated, then asked the question that had been pressing at him all day. "Would you stay?" "Clara, not just through the winter? Longer." The bluntness caught her by surprise. "I know it's soon," Daniel added quickly. "I know you're still finding your footing after Jonathan. But I need you to know there's a place here for you. For both of you. For as long as you want it." Clara studied him. This man who had saved her from a fate she still had nightmares about. He had opened his home, and now his heart, not just to her, but to Samuel as well. The way he looked at her son, the tenderness there, nearly undid her. "I don't know what the future holds," she admitted, her voice low. "But I do know this feels right. More right than anything has in a long, long time." Daniel nodded, accepting her words as they were. "That's enough for me." As they rode down toward the cabin, Clara allowed herself for the first time since that dreadful auction to imagine a life built here. Days of picnics, evenings by the fire, Samuel growing strong and laughing, and Daniel beside her through it all. It wasn't a promise yet, but it was hope, and that was something she hadn't dared to hold in years. Winter came to the Bitterroot Range with startling speed. One day the hills were blazing gold and red, and the next a sharp wind swept in from the north, dropping half a foot of snow. Within a week, the valley was locked in white. Thanks to Daniel's preparation, the homestead was well supplied. The cattle had been driven to the sheltered southern pastures. The barn was snug, and the cabin held heat well, especially with the big stone fireplace Daniel tended so carefully. Life fell into a new rhythm. Daniel rose before dawn to check the stock, often coming back with snow crusted to his coat and hat. Clara kept the fire going and prepared hot meals, all while wrangling an energetic Samuel, now 9 months old and determined to pull himself along the furniture. Daniel had built a small playpen by the fire, though Samuel treated it more like a challenge, tossing toys beyond its edge until one of them retrieved them for him. One December evening, as a blizzard shrieked outside, Clara had just put Samuel down for the night. She joined Daniel by the fire, where he was mending harness leather. "Storm's a mean one," he said, glancing at her. "Could last till tomorrow." Clara eased into the rocking chair opposite. Samuel was restless all day. Maybe he feels the weather, or maybe he's just tired of being stuck indoors. "Can't blame him," Daniel said with a wry smile. "I get stir-crazy myself." "Did you check the herd today?" she asked, noticing the fatigue in his face. "They're bedded down in the south draw. They'll be fine." He stretched, joints popping. "Spring'll be here before we know it. Only 3 more months of winter." "You mean," Clara teased. He chuckled. "Something like that." They sat listening to the storm howl and the fire crackle. Over the weeks, their closeness had deepened in countless small ways. A hand held by the fire, a brush of snow off a shoulder, kisses that spoke promises but never pressed too far. Daniel respected the tangle of grief and hope Clara carried, and that patience made her trust him all the more. "Christmas is just a week off," Clara said after a while. "Do you think we'll make it to the Harpers if this weather keeps on? If it clears, yes. If not, we'll make our own Christmas right here." Clara tried to hide her disappointment, but she'd been looking forward to the gathering, both for Samuel's sake and her own. "Samuel won't know the difference. And we have plenty to be grateful for right here. Daniel studied her face. You miss people, don't you? The company? Sometimes, she admitted. Not the gossip or the judgments, but a few friendly faces now and then. Daniel's eyes softened. Is it hard? Being out here with just me and Samuel Clara moved to kneel beside him, taking his work-roughened hands in her own. No, Daniel, it's not hard at all. These months have been the most peaceful I've known in years. Being here with you, it's been a blessing I never thought I'd find. Relief washed over his features, and in that moment, Clara realized that whatever storms the Dakota winter brought, she no longer feared them, because she wasn't facing them alone. Daniel lifted his hand and brushed his fingers against Clara's cheek, his touch both tender and steady. I feel the same, Clara, he said softly. Having you and Samuel here, it's changed everything for me. Her heart caught at the warmth in his gaze. For weeks she had guarded her feelings, tucking them away out of fear, but his words gave her courage. She leaned closer, lips meeting his in a kiss that carried all the emotions she had tried so hard to contain. Daniel responded without hesitation. His arms circled her, pulling her onto his lap. Their kiss deepened, no longer tentative, but filled with the urgency of two souls who had finally stopped denying what was already true. Clara's hands found his broad shoulders, feeling the solid strength beneath the wool of his shirt. Daniel's fingers threaded through her hair, still loose and damp from her evening bath. When they finally broke apart, breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. His voice was low, almost reverent. Clara, I know, she whispered. I feel it too. He opened his eyes, the blue depths dark with emotion. I love you. I think I have for longer than I realized. Maybe since the night you rode out after me. Maybe even before. The simple truth of it filled Clara with a joy she hadn't thought she'd feel again. I love you too, Daniel. So much it frightens me sometimes. A smile broke across his face, raw happiness lighting his features. Frightens you? Why, because I thought that part of my life was over. She admitted, after Jonathan, after all we went through, I never expected to feel this way again. And then there's Samuel, and the uncertainty of our place here. Daniel silenced her with a gentle touch of his finger to her lips. Clara Bennett, I love you, and I love that boy as if he were my own flesh and blood. None of the rest matters to me, so long as you both are safe and happy. He reached into his pocket, his hand trembling just slightly. I've been holding on to this for weeks, waiting for the right time. Opening his palm, he revealed a simple gold ring with a modest diamond. It was my mother's. I'd be honored if you would wear it, Clara gasped, her eyes darting from the ring to his face. Daniel, are you asking me? Yes, he said firmly, though his voice shook with feeling. Will you marry me? Be my wife? Let me be a father to Samuel. Let's make this homestead a real home. Together. Her vision blurred with tears as she nodded. Yes, yes, Daniel McGraw, I will marry you. He slid the ring onto her finger, and it fit as though it had been made for her alone. Their lips met again in a kiss that sealed not just their love, but their future. When she asked against his shoulder, her voice soft but certain, Spring makes sense, Daniel said, smiling. It'll be easier for folks to travel then. But truth be told, I'd marry you tomorrow if we could get to Maple Ridge. Clara laughed quietly, her face pressed against his shirt. Spring is perfect, the snow gone, flowers blooming, a true new beginning. A new beginning, he echoed, his voice deep with contentment. They stayed by the fire as the storm battered the cabin outside. Speaking of their hopes and dreams, Daniel spoke of adding rooms to the cabin, perhaps building a larger space for Samuel, and even more if their family grew. Clara's heart warmed at the thought. Yes, I'd like that. Samuel should have brothers and sisters. Daniel's arms tightened around her. I never thought I'd have a family. After the war, after everything I'd seen, I figured I didn't deserve one. Clara lifted her face to his. If anyone deserves happiness, it's you, Daniel. You're the most honorable man I've ever known. He kissed her gently, almost reverently. Thank you for seeing something in me worth loving, and thank you for riding into Silverton that day, Clara said softly, for saving us when we had nowhere else to turn. His reply came without hesitation. Best decision I ever made. Folks might have thought it charity, but the truth is, I saved myself that day. You and Samuel saved me from a loneliness I hadn't even realized was swallowing me whole. Her throat tightened at his words. She had always thought of Daniel as the one who gave, the one who had rescued her. But now she understood that what they had built together was a gift to them both. Later that night, they parted, Daniel climbing to his loft, Clara carrying Samuel to the bedroom. Yet everything was different now. The ring on her hand glimmered in the firelight, a promise of the family they would become. Christmas at the McGraw homestead was unlike any Clara had known. The weather kept them from Maple Ridge, but they made their own celebration. Daniel cut a small pine from the edge of the forest, and Clara decorated it with paper ornaments crafted during Samuel's naps. She strung popcorn, dipped pine cones in flour paste, and together they created a tree that glowed with warmth despite its simplicity. Samuel was enchanted, crawling toward it until Daniel rigged a barrier to keep him from toppling the little pine. Daniel had spent long evenings carving wooden animals, a horse, a cow, a sheep, and a bear, all smooth and perfect for small hands. Claire had secretly knitted him a scarf from a skein of yarn she'd found tucked away, working by lamplight after he'd gone to bed. And Daniel, with uncharacteristic shyness, gave her a hand-painted picture of Crystal Falls, captured in autumn hues. "It isn't much," he said as she unwrapped it. "Started drawing again this fall. Thought you might like a reminder of that day." Clara's eyes filled as she traced the brushstrokes. "Daniel, it's beautiful. I'll treasure it always." She hung it near the fireplace, where she could see it each evening from her rocker. It brought not just color to the cabin, but a glimpse of the depth and sensitivity in the man she was still learning to know. The days between Christmas and the New Year slipped by peacefully. Clara wrote letters to friends in Maple Ridge, sharing news of their engagement, while Daniel worked on plans for the garden and cabin improvements. Samuel, determined as ever, managed to stand for a few moments at a time before tumbling down with a scowl that made them both laugh. On New Year's Eve, after Samuel was asleep, Daniel opened a bottle of wine he had saved. They sat by the fire, glasses in hand, reflecting on the year gone by. "If someone had told me a year ago what would happen, I wouldn't have believed it," Clara said, her ring catching the light. "Better." "I hope," Daniel replied. "Better." She agreed firmly. "Even with the grief, even with the hardships, I feel blessed. Samuel is healthy. We have a home, a future, and I found you." Daniel kissed her hand. "I've been thinking, if the weather cooperates, April might be the right time for the wedding. The mud will be gone, and it's before the cattle need the most tending. April sounds perfect," she said. "Nothing fancy, just family and friends. Reverend Wallace can perform the ceremony. Mrs. Harper already offered her garden for the gathering. Clara laughed. Surprised. You told her months ago, didn't you? Daniel grinned, a little sheepish. When I bought the ring, couldn't keep it to myself. She kissed him softly, grateful for his patience and persistence. For the first time in years, she believed in a future bright with promise. As the clock struck midnight, they raised their glasses to the year ahead. Whatever storms lay beyond the cabin walls, they would face them together, united, hopeful, and in love. The story of Claire and Daniel reminds us that even in our darkest moments, kindness and courage can open the door to a new life. Many of us who have lived 6 decades or more understand what it means to carry loss, to feel the weight of loneliness, or to wonder if second chances are still possible. Clara believed her life was over when she stood on that auction block. Yet, one act of compassion from Daniel changed everything, not just for her, but for him as well. The lesson is simple, but powerful. Love and hope can arrive when we least expect them, and often through people we never imagined. No matter our age, it is never too late to open our hearts, to build new bonds, or to rediscover joy. Life's hardships may shape us, but they don't have to define the ending of our story. Sometimes, choosing to care for a stranger, a neighbor, or even ourselves can turn despair into possibility. Thank you, dear friends, for spending your time with us today. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us keep bringing these timeless stories of love, courage, and hope to life.